You are listening to the Cookbook Love Podcast with Maggie Green, episode number 391.
Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast, a podcast that celebrates cookbook readers, buyers, collectors, writers, and clubs. And now your host, cookbook author, culinary dietitian, and cookbook writing coach, Maggie Green.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. How's everybody doing today? Hope you're all doing well. We are having an exciting time here in Kentucky. One of my children got engaged recently, so that's been a lot of fun to celebrate. We are trying to decide if it's spring here, having some cold weather, a warmer weather, sunshine, still some snow flurries. So trying to get that figured out, and had a great weekend this past weekend celebrating my mother-in-law's birthday, and went to a dinner experience that we received for Christmas from our children, where we enjoyed a beautiful dinner in Lexington, Kentucky, with the theme of the Italian Alps. I thought that it was because of the Olympics being in Milan, but I guess from what I understand from the owner of the event center that hosted the dinner, it was actually coincidental. But what a beautiful dinner, lots of lovely food from the northern part of Italy, and what a great time to celebrate it as the Olympics wrapped up in Milan over the weekend as well. So if you wanted to let you know if you're interested in learning about traditional cookbook publishing and traditional cookbook publishing deals, today is the final day to register for the masterclass, Get Paid to Write a Cookbook. A lot of people who want to write cookbooks believe they need to finish their book before pitching it to publishers. And although that sounds logical, it often leads to years of overthinking, momentum stalling, backtracking, and uncertainty. So in the Get Paid to Write a Cookbook Masterclass, I talk all about the step-by-step path to help position your cookbook for a traditional deal where you can get paid in advance before you write the book. So if you would like to register for this masterclass, again, it's going to be coming to an end very soon. Head on over to www.cookbookwritersacademy.com/getpaidmasterclass. I will put the link in the show notes, and you can register for the class before the registration closes. So today on the podcast, I am thrilled to have a conversation with Helen Goh. Helen is the author of the new book, Baking and the Meaning of Life: How to Find Joy in 100 Recipes. No one knows the why or how of baking better than Helen. As a recipe developer with Yotam Ottolenghi for more than a decade, Helen is the co-author of his New York Times best-selling books, Sweet and Comfort. Now with the debut of her first solo cookbook, Goh shares her distinctive approach to baking with 100 delicious desserts and savory bakes. Drawing on her upbringing in Malaysia and Australia, her acclaimed work with Ottolenghi, and her active psychotherapy practice, Goh not only shares her favorite baking recipes, but also reflects on life, sharing how baking can bring us together and add joy-filled meaning to everyday moments. Today on the show, Helen and I talk all about her new book. We dive into the table of contents. We talk about how baking adds meaning to our life. It's not just for survival. And Helen shares many tips, tricks, and secrets for several delicious sweet and savory baked goods. So without further delay, let's dive into this interview with Helen Goh. Hi, Helen. Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast.
Hi, Maggie. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yes, very excited to have you here to talk all about your beautiful new book. But before we dive in, can you please tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do?
I'm Helen Goh. I was born in Malaysia. I grew up in Australia and I live in London. I've been the co-author of a number of Ottolenghi books, more particularly Sweet, which is the baking book that was released in 2017, and Comfort, Ottolenghi Comfort, which is a kind of family cookbook that was out in 2024. I'm a baking columnist for the Sydney Morning Herald and the Guardian in the UK. Yes, that's just about me full time. Well, I'm a mum of 2 children too.
Yeah, that's always a fun part of our work as well and our life.
Mm-hmm.
So your book, Baking and the Meaning of Life, recently published, fascinated me in a way that a lot of cookbooks do, obviously, but this one in particular because it combines your professional life, what you do, and then obviously what you've done as a cookbook author with a book now of your own. So I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your work as a psychotherapist, and then how that, and let's talk a little bit about, just before we get into baking, like the meaning of life and your description of what that means in terms of who we are and what we choose to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, I when I left school, I went to university because I wanted to be a psychologist. I did a Bachelor of Science, and the faculty had said to me I was too young at that point to qualify as a psychologist. So they suggested I go and experience life a bit, which I think was a fair call. And I did that. And because of my science degree, I worked for a pharmaceutical company. And part of my job was to talk to doctors about, new drugs. And I found that one of the ways that I could do it that efficiently was to organize a lunch and invite all the doctors. Rather than sort of go from one clinic to another, I would put on a lunch. And very quickly, I thought, I'm so much more interested in what's for lunch than, what I'm supposed to be talking about. And I just listened to that. And at the time I had a partner who was a journalist, and he was given this opportunity to have a redundancy package. And he'd said to me, what would you do if you had this sum of money? And I said, well, I would just open a cafe. And it was the most ridiculous thing because I'd had no experience whatsoever, and neither did he. But somehow we just, didn't let the ignorance and the lack of experience get in the way of a good story. And we went on to open this cafe, and we worked very, very hard. And it was a great success in the sense that people came, and they came again and again. And we were kind of on the map, in a small little suburb in Melbourne. And from there, when we burnt out and sold it, somehow we had people who were just remained interested in what we were doing and invited us to follow. And so I then just, cooked around and learnt and did a lot of that for about 10 years. And I went back to study to finish my psychology. And when I registered, I'd met my husband, who was based in London, and he suggested I could move to London, which I did. And when I made that decision that I would move to London, I thought I would hang up my chef's coat and, settle down to a life of psychology, because those 10 years were amazing fun, but they were also incredibly hard and physical as well. But one of the things that was difficult when I moved to London was that I couldn't practice with my Australian registration, and I had to apply for a British registration. And it was a very abstruse sort of book that I just couldn't get my head around. And the alternative was to do a doctorate. And I thought, well, I'll do that. But there was a lag time between when I applied to do the doctorate and the doctorate actually starting, the course starting. And during that time, my husband had suggested that I might want to check out this little deli down the road. And of course, that was the Ottolenghi deli. And I went in and I had a look, and I was, completely seduced by this Aladdin's cave. And I wrote that afternoon, Yotam an email to say, perhaps do you have any shifts I could do? And unbeknownst to me, he'd been given a tip by a friend that I was moving to London, and if I was ever going to knock on his door, to snap me up. So he was waiting for me, and we just got talking, and we haven't stopped talking since. And that was 20 years ago.
Yes. And then you went on to help him write Sweet and Comfort. And, it's interesting. One of the things I ask my guests a lot is not just talking about their cookbook, but other cookbooks that have influenced their work or have been staples in their kitchen, and his books have come up several times. So
Mhm,
your work and the work that he did and published in
mhm,
books
mhm.
is touching the lives of
Oh.
thousands and thousands of cooks and bakers, which I think is one of the really neat things about cookbooks. In your book, now, what was it like to do one for yourself and not one in
Mm.
partnership with Yotam?
I think it was both. It's been both daunting and liberating. At Ottolenghi, because we work collaboratively as a team, we have the luxury of sort of staying in our lane. I mean, my forte is developing recipes, and there's an in-house editor, so I write up the recipes. But we have the luxury of somebody looking over the work and correcting the grammar. So it's very luxurious. So coming out of that, that it's quite daunting in the sense that you're now this one-man band. You have to do it all, taste it all, write it up, create, develop in this, not a vacuum as such. Of course, there are always people around, but the hub of Ottolenghi is incredibly creative and incredibly fertile. There's at any given point in the kitchen, there's somebody willing to give you feedback. In fact, even when you don't want it,
Yeah.
So in preparation for that, I'd read a number of books. I was concerned about whether my writing was good enough. And I read a number of books, including Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. And, and that not only did it help me to be a better writer, it gave me that permission to have what she calls the shitty first draft. This idea that you just get it down on paper. And I applied that to recipe testing as well, because I have a tendency to try and live in my head and to think and create something in my head so fully formed that by the time I get to the kitchen, it's almost there. And then I would be devastated when it doesn't sort of come out as I'd imagined. And that idea of the shitty first draft just gave me permission just to get one version of it down, on that kitchen table. That was hugely liberating, because once you do that, you've got a roadmap where to go. But it's that starting, it's that fear sometimes that something that lives in your head is not going to work out. And when it doesn't, it can feel quite crushing. So the idea of just getting something out there and deciding from there what you want to do, it made me approach the work with less trepidation and more curiosity, genuine curiosity. So that book really helped me in not just the writing, but in terms of recipe development. I'm just far more efficient, for being able to endure, a bad.
And I think when we let things live in our head too long, that's where they stay.
Yes.
They don't progress any further than that.
Exactly.
And it's such a common thing to have happen because we're thinking about it, but we're not doing anything. And then
Yes.
so if we feel stalled or stuck, usually I agree with Anne, you just have to get something out on paper.
Yes.
Get the first draft out, see where you are, and then go from there, because you finally have taken it from what's up here to something that's
right.
Actually living on paper.
Yes. And actually, when you've got that thing on the kitchen table, you can think, oh, yes, that needs a bit of lemon. Oh, yes, but it's a bit creamy. And do I really want to put, a creamy frosting on top? I'm speaking of what my bake today, which is an almond cake, an almond raspberry ripple cake. It's for Mother's Day in Australia for my column. And, it's buttery and almondy. The cake is really beautifully buttery. But it needed frosting because it's Mother's Day. I wanted it to look pretty. But I thought, I've already got 250 grams of butter. I can't add another 250 grams of butter. So once you get it on the kitchen table, it's much easier to make those decisions.
Yeah. What was it like to write a baking book individually when it comes to not just the development of the recipes, but the tasting, the testing, the making sure it all tasted okay? Because I think as someone who has written savory books, I always felt like, well, if I tested something, I could just feed it to the family for dinner.
Yes.
We'll all be satisfied, everybody will be fed. But when you're baking, that's not always the case.
I know. And it's not as easy because people say, oh, you could just drop it around or disperse it amongst your friends. And sometimes you can, but oftentimes I want to see how that cake is the next day, or how is it in room temperature? And do I need to refrigerate it? Sometimes I just have to throw it out. So that's not easy.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's not easy. So let's start at a little bit of a high level. When you talk about meaning of life and what baking does for the meaning of life, tell us what you mean by that.
So I'll start with the title because I admit it sounds rather grandiose, and I'm referencing a book from my studies in psychology. I really loved an American psychoanalyst called Irvin Yalom, and he wrote a number of books, both textbooks and novels, based on his experience as a psychoanalyst. And one of the books was called Mama and the Meaning of Life. And apart from, it's a very rich book, but what I took away from it was that this idea of people's ordinary lives, or the ordinary moments in people's lives, when you stitch them together, makes for an extraordinary life. And I thought, actually, with Ottolenghi, with the process of writing books, it's very outward facing, whether it's you're looking at your cookbook audience or the customer who comes into those stores and the restaurants. When I came out of writing for Ottolenghi, I suddenly thought that actually I have a whole host of kind of quieter recipes that I've been baking for years, and they feel almost more reflective in some way. And coming out of that sort of exuberant phase with creating for Ottolenghi, I realized that I had so much within and so much of a quieter kind of recipe that I really love. And when I looked at it, it was whenever I looked at these recipes and when I've made them, who I've made them for, and the context of them, there was usually a story. And when I pieced together the story, and that what came out of that are those 7 chapters, which we'll talk about soon. But I thought to myself that all of those things stitched together makes for an extraordinary life. I've captured all the little moments that I've celebrated and commemorated with friends and family and strangers who've maybe ordered a cake from me. All of that has made up my life. And when I did my thesis, my doctoral thesis I interviewed women and I transcribed their interviews, and then I tried to find common threads. So I applied that quite unconsciously. I really did not think that the process would have anything at all in common with writing a cookbook. But I think without even realizing, I employed something of this delving into the narrative and letting the themes well up from within. And when I looked at that, when did I make that? What was it for? I realized, that's about continuity. That's a ritual and a tradition. So those chapters kind of almost formed themselves, after quite a lot of work and thinking. But I realized that everything I'd made was not in a vacuum. And even when it was because I just wanted to perfect making choux pastry, well, that fitted into this idea of learning, growth, and achievement, because that's what gives me, it derives a lot of meaning for me.
Yeah. And something you pointed out in the introduction that I think really helped to kind of bring home what you were setting out to accomplish with this book was the difference between things we do to survive and things that we do in our life to add meaning to our life.
Right. Yes.
So tell us a little bit about the difference between those two and how it is that baking falls into one and not the other.
When Yotam and I were traveling after Sweet, our baking book came out, it coincided with the time that there was a big uptake of this idea of no sugar, that sugar was evil and sugar was as addictive as cocaine, and we need to make a real effort to ban it. And we thought we could be really either very defensive or we could lean into that. Yes, it isn't something you want to eat every day, but why have we persisted in baking? Why have we done that? And it's because it's not just about the taste of it. I mean, often it tastes wonderful, but it's because it represents something else. It's a bit like, and I don't want to sound grandiose, but it's like art. Nobody needs it. And yet on the other hand, what does it mean to live a good life? Some of the things that don't really matter. Do we need flowers? Well, we don't. But what does it add to our lives? What would our lives be without flowers, without art, without baking, without that cake? So yes, we all need sustenance and nourishment with dinner, but we also need the humanity, what brings us together. And, you'll see that in my book, there's a chapter on community, nurturing, rituals and traditions. I mean, I'm currently baking for Chinese New Year and I'm writing for Easter. I'm doing chocolate cakes and hot cross buns for Easter. We mark our lives with these bakes. And I think it's because of the very fact that they are not essential, it guides us to thinking that there must be something symbolic or there must be another reason why we do it. And I think these bakes that we do, during particular times on the calendar, I think it helps us to locate ourselves in time and also in community, because soon everybody will be making hot cross buns and chocolate eggs and chocolate cake. And, and then I know for Ramadan, they'll be making, date bakes and mamul biscuits. And so there are reasons why we do it. And I think we'd be kind of lost without them.
Yeah. Because what would life be without art, music?
Yeah.
Architecture.
Yes.
Beautiful things, gardening, baking. Even you mentioned sports. And I think that's true. People that pursue individual sports, team sports, athletics, none of these really for survival, but I think they point to something bigger. And obviously, I come from a background where I would probably talk about transcendence and the fact that we let something bigger and more powerful than us shine through us, and it's a means to joy and happiness and peace and things that we all want to pursue in life, but these just become means to that end. And the thing about baking is this won't be a channel to a meaningful life for everybody. But people that love to bake and people that can see that we're not talking about necessarily a loaf of bread to put on the table to feed the family, this is even things above and beyond that. So let's talk about the table of contents, because you organized it in a way that is unique to the book, unique to the topic, and something that I've mentioned on the podcast before that I'm seeing in a lot of cookbooks, where the table of contents is really almost a story in and of itself. It's not just cakes, cookies, pies. That's great if you want to do it that way, but yours tells us more about the recipes. Tell us a little bit about how your recipes are organized.
Yes, because you're right. I mean, mostly in a way, it's easier just to say, yes, this is a cookie chapter, this is a cheesecake chapter, and this is small cakes, and these large cakes, and this is confectionery. But I think you're absolutely right when you say that the table of contents reflects something about what the author wants to convey. Because the sine qua non of a cookbook is the recipes, and they have to work. You've got to have a good body of them, and they have to be, reliable. Without that, there is no cookbook. And I'm very conscious that for my publisher, that was it. They could listen to my ideas, but actually, really, all they cared about was that I got that 100 recipes, really, really, good recipes in there.
Yeah.
And then you could sort of play around a bit. And there is a bit of a trade-off in terms of how you want the book to be straightforward and easy to use. But on the other hand, yes, what else might you want to say about it that makes it uniquely yours? And as I said, I drew something about the doctoral thesis that I wrote for my psychology dissertation. I drew from that something about themes, and I felt confident that my recipes were interesting, were good, were joyous to eat. And that gave me the idea that I could play around a bit and tap into something more that I wanted to say without disrupting that, the recipes. So my idea on these chapters, there's a little short essay at the beginning of each chapter. If people want to read it, I mean, they don't have to read it because, they could just buy it and use it as a straightforward cookbook. But I felt, as you said, authors want to bring in something more of what they want to say that doesn't get in the way of the recipe.
Yeah, you're in great company here on the Cookbook Love podcast because many of our listeners love to read cookbooks, even over and above using them.
I know. Well,
So,
I grew up just reading cookbooks in bed.
yes, yes,
The best thing was getting a new cookbook and tucking yourself up in
yes.
that.
Yeah. And I always had the habit of like starting, I don't know why it is, but I would start like reading, I'd start with the index and
Mm,
read through. And, an index really is a great way to see exactly what's in the book as opposed to the
mm,
table of contents, which kind of shows you its organizing principle. And I
yes.
would go, then I would kind of go back to the beginning, but the index always fascinated me. And um, your table of contents has chapters like giving, receiving, and sharing,
Mm,
nurturing, celebrating, remembering and continuity, community and belonging, ritual and tradition, learning, growth, and achievement. And you mentioned that you had this repertoire of recipes outside of even the work you did with Ottolenghi, and you started to kind of think, well, I made the shoe paste and that might go in the growth chapter, or I made this roasted pineapple that might go in the nurturing chapter. So you kind of almost in your mind had reasons or ways that you bake these things, and they kind of categorize themselves, it sounds like.
yes, and some of them could belong in multiple chapters because you can make the same thing for different occasions and different reasons. And so there was a bit of movability. I could move them around a bit. I tried to locate the thing that was most meaningful and put it in the chapter that was most meaningful to that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So then the introductions were very good. I think that it does give you a sense of the types of recipes that might be in there. And that's, of course, like you said, of course they could be in multiple chapters, but
Mm.
I like when I went into the nurturing chapter and I read the recipe list, I'm like, I can totally see why this apple pie might be in the
Right.
nurturing chapter. Yes.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
and talking about necessity, and nourishment with eating and then baking that apple pie. The story around that is that I had a friend whose husband was going through chemotherapy, and they had a very, very challenging time. And a number of us used to bake and used to cook dinner. Drop off soups and roast chicken and salads and stews. And towards the end of his treatment, she said to me, he's really feeling better and he's craving an apple pie. And she described this particular one that he loved on his travels to Australia. And I said, oh, I don't know that one. Tell me more about it. And so she described it and I worked according to her description. And the day that I delivered it, I mean, I think it was at the end of sort of 9 months of chemotherapy, they were almost in tears. And even though they were very appreciative of the lasagnas and the chicken and the salads and soups that we brought, there was something about that apple pie. And it was because no one needed to eat it. But it symbolized his recovery.
Yes.
It symbolized the time and the focus that I took to developing that for him and making that and giving it to him. So it was the symbolism of it and the idea that it wasn't just an apple pie. It was our care for each other,
Yeah, it's beautiful, and I could totally see why it was in that chapter. I thought we might go through a couple of the chapters here and look at some of the recipes and talk a
Mm-hmm.
little bit about it because it's not only sweets. There are some
Mm-hmm.
savory things in
Oh,
the book as
yes.
well, some
Yeah.
savory bakes and some
Mm-hmm.
very delicious ones. The one I want to start with, little bit of a personal connection over the weekend. For Christmas, our children got us experience for a gift where we got to go to a dinner that celebrated the food of the Italian Alps. And this was
Oh,
in connection to the Olympics being in Italy. And
right.
so it was food from northern Italy.
Right.
There
I
was
know
like
just
some,
the recipe you're
right.
thinking about.
Yeah. So there was some wild boar on the menu, and
Wow.
we had some, several courses related to Northern Italian cuisine and food of the Alps. So there's a recipe in here for gnocco fritto. And I would
Mm-hmm.
love if you
Mm-hmm.
talked a little bit about that recipe, because I have to say I had read about it in books before. I've never personally made it. And then I saw it on the menu there. Of course, we had it in the context of a little charcuterie plate. And
Yes.
now here I turn to your book and it's a
Right.
recipe in here. And this is in the giving, receiving, and sharing chapter.
Yes, because it's what I love to have when friends come over for drinks, or we're having a little drink before supper.
Yeah.
And I mean, although it's not baking, in fact, this particular pastry is fried, I justified its inclusion by saying that it's a pastry. It's just so you roll it very, very thinly and it's deep fried. And usually, as you said, it's served with charcuterie. And what I've done there is served it with anchovy and a salsa verde, because I love this idea of something sharp and acidic. But I love savory food because of the rusticity. There's something so inviting about it. Oftentimes with cake, there's a bit of pressure that it has to look pretty. And cheesy, rustic bites, for me, it's just an invitation to relax. And the savory chapters came about because I had a friend who was moving house, and normally what I would do when I visit is to bring a cake. But she'd declared that she was not eating gluten and not eating sugar. And I thought, oh God, that's a bit of a bore. But then when I recovered from that, I thought, I'm going to bake a savory pie. So I made a broccoli pie for her, which is in the book. And we loved it so much. I made it, it was round I made it in a cake tin, and we sliced it up like a cake, and we sat in the garden and enjoyed it with drinks. And it was every bit as, wonderful as if it was a cake. And that gave me the kind of opening to including more savory baking. Yes. In fact, there's 17. And I have to say, I've been on Instagram seeing what people have made. And I have to say the savory chapters have been a real hit.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think that it takes that, you were talking about sugar and baking, and we can't have any sugar. But this is baking. This is, I've always had a fascination with homemade crackers. And here in Kentucky, we make little cheese wafers with like sharp cheddar cheese. It's like a small nibble that you would eat with a cocktail. Kentucky, probably something with bourbon in it, but it's it's like a homemade cracker, a little savory cracker. And to me, this is sort of the same thing, but instead of being baked, it's fried.
Yes.
But it was just absolutely delicious, and it kind of puffed up. And this looks like in the picture, it's a little bit puffed up, and
That's right.
Yeah, and so I think that it's simple, it's homemade, it shows, and perfecting or being known for someone who makes something like this when company comes over to share with people. I think it's just that little improvement's not the right word, but it's like a little elevation of what we might normally do for a cocktail hour.
I totally agree with you, Maggie. It's just, it's simple, but it's delightful.
It is delightful.
It's something delightful that, yes, you could, just tear open a box of crackers, and there's nothing wrong with that.
No, there isn't anything wrong with that. No,
absolutely. But if you wanted to make it, it's just an extra kind of delightful
Yes. So I'm thrilled to see the recipe. We loved the idea of the toppings you put on it as well. So I'm going to have to give that a try.
Oh, great.
All right. So the nurturing chapter, we have to talk about the perennial favorite, chocolate chip cookies. Is there anything more nurturing than home-baked cookies? So tell us about your crisp and chewy chocolate chip cookies.
So I do have a recipe in sweet, which my children, well, they're not very keen bakers, but when their friends come and they want to eat something, it's usually that chocolate chip cookie. And one day my younger son, Jude, had a friend over, and they were desperate to make that. And we didn't have any eggs, but I'm prone to collecting egg whites in the fridge. I'm always saving them. And so I sort of thought, well, look, it's just really for them to keep them occupied. So let's just, use the egg whites and see how that goes. And even if it's not great, they can still eat it. We can bake it, and their afternoon would have been taken care of. But actually what happened was that it was delicious. And I'm not a huge chocolate chip fan. I don't love when it's very doughy or when it's undifferentiated, whether it's very crispy or very chewy. And these hit that spot where it was chewy around the edges it was crisp around the edges and chewy in the middle. And I thought that is just a really delicious biscuit. And from there, it was a short step to thinking, well, I could actually make this vegan, because if I can use egg whites, I can use aquafaba, which I also collect because we eat beans. And And then when I made it, that also worked. I mean, it doesn't look quite as robust as a regular chocolate chip cookie, but I think it's the sort of thing that when you want to be able to feed a lot of people when you make a batch of chocolate chip cookies, there's something very inclusive to be able to say, yes, you if you're dairy free or if you're vegan, you can eat this.
Yes.
In fact, that brings me to another recipe in the book called the chocolate cake for everyone. Did you see that?
No, I haven't seen that one yet, but that sounds great. Tell us about it.
Well, my oldest son, who's quite a competitive boy, at school, the teacher had organized a kind of school bake-off, a class bake-off. And, there's 22 of them in a classroom. And he, when it was his turn to make something, he realized that 3 of his friends had intolerances. One was intolerant to eggs, another was dairy, and the other one was nuts. So he came home and said, what's a chocolate cake, a favorite cake that everybody can eat? And I thought, oh gosh, we'll have to really think about that one. It's not easy to make a dairy-free, egg-free, nut-free sort of cake because normally, you use ground almonds or ground nuts to give it sort of a texture if it's gluten-free. Yep. Anyway, so together over a number of weeks, we came up with this cake that it's actually one of my favorites. And when I tell the story, people think, oh, your son is so lovely, how inclusive. But actually, I think in his mind, the more people who voted for, who could eat the cake would vote for him. And he was just very competitive and he wanted to win.
And he wanted one that everybody could enjoy.
Yes, because actually the more people who enjoyed it, the more people to vote for him. But I was very pleased because I'm not generally prone towards free from baking. And that really forced me to dig a bit deeper. And I think it's one of my favorite recipes. I love that no one can tell that it's vegan and that it starts off as dried apricots that are soaked and pureed. So something about that gelatinous quality that it both functions as sort of the glue for the cake and also the egg replacement. And I think it's a really lovely, tasty cake.
Yeah, nice. You mentioned aquafaba. This is a technical question. Is it the aquafaba from chickpeas generally the only one that works the best in place of egg whites?
I think they all work.
Yeah, or do other bean liquid also work? Yeah.
I think they do. They do. For me, it's more, let's say, a tin versus a jar. The tin ones tend to be a bit more watery my experience. So it's not so much what kind of pulse it is, what kind of bean it is, and more the kind of how it's been stored and how it's been processed.
And so buying beans in a tin or a can versus in a jar versus cooking your own beans, that might not be the same as, is that true, than the ones that are purchased? Is that right?
In my experience, I mean, I think if you can cook with very little water and not dilute it so much, you may have more luck. Yeah. But I tend to, if I'm looking for aquafaba, if we have beans, I will save it and freeze it.
Yes. But jarred beans, in your experience, maybe tend to work a little better over the tinned beans.
I do, but it varies also from brand to brand, so it's not an easy.
Yeah.
It's.
I'm just sitting here thinking too, like if you did. Like I think black beans, the color of the bean gets into the liquid, but maybe you would try that in a cake that is chocolate or something that's darker in color already, rather than putting it obviously in a lighter cake or something that you wouldn't want to see any of the brown flecks from the black beans. Yeah.
Yes.
I just was curious about that. Yeah.
My experience is that once you mix it all up and whip it and do all that, that it doesn't tend to affect the cake so much.
Okay. Yeah, very good. Well, that's an interesting observation. I am glad that you answered that. A couple people had asked me, and I'm like, well, I had always heard just chickpeas, but I guess one thing about it, you can always experiment, right? You can.
Yes, and I think this is the other thing about baking. You know, when you're involved in it, it feels like you're very focused and it's a very embodied process. And you have to really bring yourself to it, to be attuned to it. And yet it's a low stakes kind of environment, because what's the worst that can happen? Something isn't edible, It's not the end of the world. And I think it both offers that a laboratory for creativity that you can really immerse yourself into, but it's challenging enough that you can feel very connected to it, but it's not so challenging that it's stressful,
Yeah. I love the question, what's the worst thing that can happen?
Right. Well, I guess that comes from my psychology.
It's true. It's
Right.
true. Yeah, it's 100% true. And it's really an important thing to ask ourselves if there truly is not a lot of risk and it's something you want to do, why would you not try?
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
For a long time, I was baking with my younger son who does like baking. And I realized that I saw it as teaching him how to cook. And actually, it really put him off because I was pedantic and I was very fastidious about not getting eggshells in that brownie batter.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, thank goodness I came around to seeing it as just we're hanging out. And what he's learning is this mastery of something and this idea of making a mistake and the world not ending.
Right.
And next time, cracking the egg a little more neatly without getting the shells in the batter. And that is the gift of it. It's not learning to cook. He'll eventually get there if he wants to. That's not the important thing. The important thing is that the kitchen functions as a kind of laboratory for real life. You can keep at something and then you will master it.
Yeah, you definitely
and that actually, if you make a mistake, it's okay. It's recoverable.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's a great thing for us as parents to model to our children, and in the kitchen is a perfect place to do it because we know there's spills, there's drips, there's, like you said, eggshell in the batter. There might be an ingredient that we open and it just isn't the right thing, or, we thought we had enough olive oil and we don't. Just lots of things to overcome, but easily overcome through practice and through learning and knowing that it truly is not the end of the world.
Yes.
Well, let's go into the community and belonging chapter. Tell us a little bit about this. And I'd love to talk about the iced Vovo mini cakes.
Ah, yes. When I think of Australia, where I did most of my growing up, there's an iconic biscuit called, when I say biscuit, it's a cookie. It's a commercial cookie called iced Vovo. And the cake bears absolutely no resemblance to that cookie, except that it was cherry and coconut. And that's what I think of when I think of cherry and coconut. And that made me think of this cake. So they're loose associations. And I think this is the thing about our connections. They don't have to map one to one. And that association alone gave me this sense of continuity because I've lived in England now for 20 years. But when I think of that, it takes me to, being those first years in Australia. And there's something about the Australian baking, which is sort of generous and casual and relaxed. And I wanted to capture something of that fun of it with that sort of small barrel looking cake. It's quite an easy cake. It's just an assembly that makes it look quite special.
Yeah, it looks really good. It looks like it's rolled in, is it coconut on the edge?
Yes, it is. So it's rolled in jam. It's brushed with jam and rolled in coconut. So that was the part that is the iced Vovo, which is the cherry jam and the coconut.
Here in the U.S., we have this snack cake that comes, you can buy it at the grocery store. Two of them in a package. They're called snowballs.
Oh, okay.
And it's a round chocolate cake. And depending on the season, it might be covered in green and then coconut for maybe St. Patrick's Day, or pink and coconut for Easter. So they change the color of the snowballs based on, and I don't know who makes it, Hostess or Little Debbie or somebody, but the idea of a nice coconut on the outside of this cake, I love it because you can easily pick it up and eat it, but it doesn't get your fingers.
Yes.
It's like kind of like the coconut provides like a little bit of protection.
Yes. And that's exactly my iced Vovo cake as well, because it's jam underneath that coconut, but you can pick it up.
It's beautiful. And then the cream is a mascarpone. Is that what it is? The cream on top.
Yes.
Yeah. Beautiful.
I usually put a bit of mascarpone because one of the things I've learned with baking around the world is how different cream can be. I mean, the double cream here whips to a very luscious sort of consistency. And I know when I was traveling in America and I did a couple of TV segments and I thought, well, this cream is really light and airy. And by the time you try and, sort of cover a cake with it, it breaks down very quickly. So the mascarpone is as much for stabilizing it when we cook around the world,
Yes.
to make sure that it holds, because everybody can get mascarpone, and that gives you that sort of richer texture.
Yes.
And actually, talking about cross-cultural or cross-country baking, I employed a recipe tester to test every single recipe. She's based in San Francisco, and I had one in Sydney as well. That was really important to me because, apart from anything, when we talk about baking that's very close to our hearts, nostalgia and sentimentality can sometimes cloud our judgments. And it was very important to me that these bakes would work and would be equally delicious in anyone else's kitchen.
Yeah.
In fact, I'd never met these two ladies. Of course, I've gotten to know them much better now. But they cooked every single recipe and provided feedback on how this different cream worked, and they can be very different. So the mascarpone in there is because of the feedback that some of the creams were just not like the double cream that I was working on.
Yeah. I think the heavy cream here is maybe 36% butter fat. And if you have a double cream in the UK, it might be in the 40s.
Yes.
And it does provide more stability. And I love that you talked about the testing of it in the countries where you thought the cookbook would be popular, where it might sell, and not just in the UK, but obviously a US audience and Australian audience. And then, of course, your inclusion of imperial measurements and metric measurements in terms of gram weight for people that bake both ways.
Yes.
Some people use cups and tablespoons, some don't. Of course, baking, I think there's a huge argument to be made for using a scale. I think it makes it so much easier, but everybody's got to do what they're used to doing. And I see that you included both, which is nice.
Yeah, I remember when I got Maria, who's my recipe tester in San Francisco, when I got her on board, the very first email she wrote to me was, "Now, I know that you're often very critical. All of you living abroad are very critical of the imperial measurements, but this is why I like it." She said, between my thumbnail and the first crease on my thumb, that's 1 inch. I know approximately what a foot is. I know approximately what a cup is. And, she almost convinced me.
You didn't have to have a scale for any of that, right?
Yeah, but I think what she was saying was that it's something intuitive that you can, when you say a cup of sugar, you immediately know just about how much, whereas actually saying 200 grams of sugar, it's quite difficult to picture.
No, I think the imperial measurements do allow you to visualize a little bit better what it might be.
Yes.
So let's say that they say, every day you should eat 3/4 a cup of oatmeal. I'm thinking that is a lot of oats to eat every day. I mean, that's a huge portion. I don't know what these people are talking about, but it's all because I can visualize how much that might be.
Yes.
Of course,
because if you think 100 grams of oats,
I don't know how much that is. Well, and I think that's one argument that people have with food labels is sometimes the food labels are calculated based on 100-gram quantity, and people are like, what does that even mean?
Yes, that's right.
So, okay, we got 100 grams of M&Ms. Well, that's nice. Is that a handful or is it 2 handfuls or is it a bowl full of M&Ms? How much is it?
It's so confusing. And sometimes you buy this huge meal and it says, 152 calories, but that's for 80 grams. And you're eating something that's 800 grams.
Right, 10 times that amount. Yeah.
Exactly.
So food labels are a whole nother conversation. But I think that in a book like yours, to put both is kind of a nod to people do both. You have audiences that do both. So I don't think it has to be all one way or the other, which is nice. All right, let's talk about the learning, growth, and achievement chapter, because this is different than nurturing. It's different than community. It's different than ritual. Tell us a little bit about this chapter and your intent behind it.
This chapter was the very last chapter to come about. In fact, I almost didn't have it because the book was so much geared towards this idea of community and nurture, other people. When we think of baking a cake, it's very unusual that there isn't a relationship involved. there's usually somebody you're having for afternoon tea, or you're dropping it off for a birthday, or you're making it to commemorate something. But then I thought that's actually not true for people like me. And there are a lot of people like me who enjoy baking because of the process of it and because of that sense of mastery. And I thought, I'm not on my own here. And whether it's gardening, and of course, I'm in this book, I'm talking about baking, but when I say learning, growth and achievement, I'm really referring to lots of things that we do, from learning a language to gardening to learning to crochet. All of these things might seem meaningless. I mean, no one needs a little table crochet, and yet there's something about learning that craft that can bring some meaning. And I thought, that chapter belongs in there. And I'm glad, because the number of people I've spoken to, including you and the podcast, where, people, it's a dedicated podcast to cookbooks and people who bake and cook. They exist as, they are popular for a reason.
Yes. And not every book has to be for a beginner or someone that's just starting. There are people that buy books that want to learn new things or master something or get better at it. And there's people that listen to this show that I'm sure could be considered master cooks or master bakers, but that's not their profession. It's just it adds meaning to their life.
Yes.
And the one recipe that stuck out to me, and I got to tell you, napkin cakes with jam and white chocolate cream. It's an example of something that's a little bit more unusual. Probably haven't seen it a lot, but you mentioned Jeremiah Duarte Bills, who was a quarterfinalist in the Great American Baking Show.
That's right. So Jeremiah and is it Amanda?
Amanda Faber had the Flower Hour podcast.
That's right. They had the podcast and they interviewed me when Sweet came out. And I was so fascinated by, they asked a lot of very good questions. But when I discovered what they both did, I had lots of questions myself, and I thought, I really wanted to learn from them. And Jeremiah is very dedicated to Portuguese baking.
Yes.
So I signed up to one of his classes, online classes, and he made these guardanapos, which is napkin cakes in Portugal. And they use a lot of egg yolks. So there's a custard, and then there's egg yolks in the sponge, and then there's a custard as well. And I was so taken by this because I'd never seen it, never heard of it. And yet it was the idea that it was just this delicate thing that was folded. That was just completely.
It almost looks like it's a square, but it's almost like when I think about a taco shell, like folded like around the filling, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And these are intended to be eaten out of hand like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he'd made them, they were very rich, and I'm not used to the flavor of sort of custard on custard. But when I thought of the cake, I thought, it's like eating a light Victoria sponge or a sponge cake. And whenever I think of a light sponge cake, I think jam and cream. And that's what gave me the idea that I wanted to make it with jam and cream. Okay. I've done one iteration of it, which I brought my Malaysian heritage to it, which is kaya. It's a coconut jam. And I've added kaya in it, and I've made the sponge with pandan, because pandan and kaya are very, very familiar flavors in Malaysia. But it's such a beautiful recipe that I really wanted to not make it so exotic. I wanted to make it more accessible, that if you could just make it with jam and cream, it's just like a little jam and cream sandwich,
Yeah.
But
it does. When I first looked at it, it reminded me of without looking at I'm just looking at the photo, almost like a fold over sandwich. Like you might have a piece of bread and you fold it over, and maybe you put some jam or peanut butter and you fold it over and you just eat a sandwich like that.
That's exactly right. I mean, it's not quite as easy as that, but I wanted to convey something about the eating of fresh, soft bread with jam and cream. I mean, that to me is just utterly delightful.
Yes.
And I'm very thankful for Jeremiah, because I'd never seen anything like it, and yet it just makes complete sense. Yes. So the cake is cooked. It's a very, very flat. Yeah, it's a very flat sponge cake that's cooked in a sort of a tray bake, like a oven tray, and then you cut it into squares and fold it diagonally so it forms a triangle, and it's kind of barely draped over.
Yeah. Well, I had Jeremiah on the podcast. Gosh, it's probably in the early days. But he told me the reason in Portugal they use all the egg yolks in baking is because all the nuns or sisters use the egg whites to starch their habits.
Starchy. Yes, that's
To
right.
keep
Isn't
all
that
the
fabulous?
white part of their habits like stiff,
Yes,
and
isn't
that
that
they had
fabulous?
all. So he often called them convent sweets. That a lot of the history
Yeah.
of Portuguese sweets came out of the convents there, the Catholic tradition, and that most of them were egg yolk based. So
Yes.
yeah,
Isn't that fantastic?
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, 100%. So I was so thrilled to see Jeremiah's name here, and I love that you put that also in the learning, growth, and achievement chapter, because that's something that we could all learn how to do. We could take our
Definitely.
baking to the next level. And also, I think also it's fun to be known for something like, oh, Maggie makes these wonderful like napkin cakes. I mean, so there's so many, the world is so big and there's so many people. And you know, pockets of people all around the world make napkin cakes. It just is a way to, I don't know, just bring a little bit of, I think it's kind of whimsical, a little bit different, something
Yes.
fun to the
Yes.
experience.
And also just the idea of learning from other people.
Right.
I think sometimes there's a pressure, and thankfully I don't really feel that, the pressure to be very clever and making something unique. And
Yeah.
actually, I'm just thrilled if I learn something and then you can add something your own
Yes.
and make it your own,
Yes.
And for me, that is both creative as well as respectful, to somebody. I mean, I really admire Jeremiah's cooking, and I really was thrilled to learn this from him. And it was both tapped into my creativity as well as my acknowledgement of his expertise and craft.
Yes.
I just feel that that's win-win,
Yes, yes. And I think as you were saying that, I was thinking about baking being win-win, because not only do we get the enjoyment of what we've baked, I always think the baked good is like the means. It's like the middle part. It's not the end. It's like well, eating it is the end, but it's the emotional experience of sharing it with people or creating something new. That is the end part, right? The way we
But, I
feel
think,
as a result.
yes, but then I think it's even more layered than that, because the very first part of it is often this, that you're just you and that idea and you and that process of measuring butter and creaming butter and sugar and folding and lining the cake tin. And that's quite solitary and quite focused. So you go from that very personal experience to then this very social experience of sharing it. And then the layer on top of that is the cultural element of sharing. So you've got something personal, something social, and something cultural usually as well, because, is this from your grandmother? What heritage is it? Is it Portuguese? Is it Malaysian? And when do you make it? Or we usually make it at this time of the year. We usually, so it's layered in a way that is, I think, a little more than just cooking,
and then you have something delicious to eat on top of it.
Yes.
I mean, those things that you mentioned doesn't even talk about the enjoyment of the baked good itself.
Yeah. And, also the other process that you don't see is the alchemical process, where a couple of weeks ago, I did this, I posted something on Instagram. I had donated a private baking class to a charity event, and the lady had come to claim it. And the night before, I weighed out all the mise en place on trays, and my son came down in the morning and he said, "Can you imagine that when I get back from school, this is going to be 3 cakes?" And I thought, that's exactly it. Who would imagine that these random pools of butter and sugar and chocolate are going to be these 3 delicious cakes? So there's that alchemical part of it. And it was the way he captured it, the way he said, "Can you imagine that this is all going to be cakes by the time I get back from school?"
Yeah.
And, so there's also that.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, anything that you make anything one cooks there's some sort of chemistry involved in that. But, but it's different to the way a chicken goes into the oven as a chicken and it comes out as a chicken.
Right.
But a cake goes in as a kind of molten batter and then comes out as this whole other thing.
Yeah. Yeah. The food science behind it is fascinating. And how does it feel then to not only have your baking and the meaning of life in your own kitchen and us individually, but now to have a book about it that you mentioned in the introduction? It's a joyous process that magically expands when shared. And now this book is magically expanding this message that you have.
Maggie, I can't tell you how utterly thrilled I am
Yes.
with the particularly with the American response. I mean,
Yes.
you said something there about sort of cooking in Australia and the UK and the US, and I want to share something which is sort of a little embryonic in my head, but I think that there's some truth to it. The book we're very well received in Australia and very well received beyond my wildest dreams in America. And in England, the response has, for me, I think, has been a tiny bit clipped. And I think there's something a bit too confessional in it. You know, I really brought my personal stories, my professional insight, and my kind of baking expertise into this book. And I think it's altogether a bit too confessional and large for
London,
the UK.
for the UK.
I mean, I've had, wonderful write-ups and all that, but what I know when I speak to people, the exuberance that I'm feeling from the Americans was not something I'd experienced in the UK. There was a real respect and a real appreciation for the book, but in conversation, it hasn't been this sort of, bubbling over of, kind of conversation about it. And I think it has something to do with that it's maybe more emotional rather than cerebral, I would say.
Yeah.
To it.
I agree.
So it's been interesting
Joyous,
to see that cultural
delicious,
difference.
fun. It is meaningful. It's in this magic expansion of ingredients and words now turned into this beautiful book. And, cookbooks do that in a lot of different ways, baking books in particular, because it takes you from this necessity thing that you maybe feel like you have to do to a experience of baking, which is certainly not necessary, but adds a lot of meaning, as you say, to your life. So I'm thrilled that you have written the book and that you brought this. What did you say in the beginning? The title seemed a little grandiose. I think you did a beautiful job with it because hopefully people that have listened to this conversation understand what you mean. And if people buy the book and don't understand what you mean by reading the title, all they have to do is read the introduction to understand what you mean and look at the table of contents, and it all becomes very apparent.
Yes, it's really about the small things. As I said, all the large things that Ottolenghi, but then I thought, well, actually, all these small things really add up to something special as well. And in fact, more so in some ways. And in a way, the book is an invitation also for people to not just bake from that, but to think about why they bake, who they bake for, and what recipes lurk within their families.
Right. That's right.
That have brought so much joy as well.
And a lot of times recipes that are passed down include both savory items and a lot of baked goods, and in particular, holiday baked goods that are family traditions for different holidays, Christmas cookies or Easter cakes or things people make for Thanksgiving or things people make for Mother's Day, the New Year. I encourage people to dive into that and to really explore what your family did, especially if it's written down, and to preserve it, because you talk about meaning for a family. If someone reproduces a cake that someone in the family used to make that is no longer with them, it just brings back the memory of them.
That's right. And that's an example of some of the recipes in my chapter called Continuity and Remembering, that it instantly connects you to somebody.
Yeah.
It instantly that recipe holds that story. I mean, I don't want to be, too sentimental about it, but it's quite an extraordinary thing to do.
Sure it is. And I think in particular for someone like you who has moved from several different countries, several different places for a variety of reasons, that baking can bring back memory of places you've been before and people you've spent time with.
You know, Maggie, I'd not thought of it like that, but you're absolutely right, because I don't travel to Malaysia very often.
Yeah.
But the idea that I can buy pandan leaves at my local Asian grocer and make a cake and tell my children this was the cake I ate when I grew up in Malaysia.
Yeah.
That's really pretty amazing.
It is pretty amazing.
Right.
It is pretty amazing. And we have our modern ability to get ingredients now to thank for that. But it really, truly is amazing, because a lot of the memories that we have as children, many of them are based on food and connection
Yes.
to people and flavors and aromas and smells and settings. So I think it's wonderful that you're able to do that for them, particularly if they haven't experienced it with you in
Yes.
Malaysia. They can have it with you now.
Yes.
As you've recreated it.
I think also baking, you instantly connected. The association is with care and attention, because the very first, from when we're young, we've all had birthday cakes made for us.
Yes.
So it's that connection to being cared for and being the focus of attention. It's
isn't that the truth about birthday cakes? There were 8 children in our family, and the birthday cake always was on this metal birthday cake stand that my mother would have to wind it up and put the cake on it, and then it was like a music box, and it played Happy Birthday as it unwound.
How amazing. Do you still have it?
I know we don't still have it. And I don't even remember the house I was born into. We moved when I was in the first grade to a bigger house because we needed room for more children. And I don't remember that cake plate at the second house. I'll have to ask my older sisters.
But I've never come across that, and yet it seems so logical.
My grandfather was German, and music boxes were very popular in their culture, and cuckoo clocks, all this tinkling stuff going on. So it's possible that he had bought it for them, but I'll have to ask that. But I just remember my mom's cakes were, she would make a little layer cake and put some frosting on it, but just that memory of everybody's birthday having not just the cake, but the plate that it was on.
That is fascinating, because it feels so logical, and yet why have I never seen one?
And it was such a special thing, so a lot of memories. It's a holiday, a special day, but birthdays are individually focused too, and I think I think that we all need to celebrate our birthdays, our children's birthdays. It's a very important day. It's a very special day, and don't ever act like it's not, because it represents a human life, and I think that's the most valuable thing of all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Celebrating a person that we love and care about. And,
absolutely.
Yes, that's very, very fun. Well, this has been a delightful conversation. Helen, wonderful. I would love if you would tell everyone how they can connect with you online.
Online, I'm on Instagram as Helen_Goh_bakes. I'm not a TikToker, and I don't have YouTube, although I've done a number of YouTube things. But I think, Instagram is about all I can do.
Yeah, that's great. And I do like to ask if there are, outside of Ottolenghi's books and your book, if there's any cookbook that you have used or that has had a presence in your life over the years that is special to you.
Gosh, so many. If I could scan my home, you will see there are cookbooks on every surface.
Yes.
Because I see them not just as recipes, but, they're stories. I think we, spoke about that.
Yes.
What do I like to use? I used to love the ones with more narrative than so for example Gabrielle what's her name, Gabrielle Hamilton.
Yes.
I loved reading sort of the narratives in her book. I don't use the recipes so much, but I love reading it. And then there are other ones like the Flavor Thesaurus. Do you know that book?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
So, that I don't cook from, obviously, but
it's so wonderful for pairing things together.
Yes, it's wonderful. I have one by my bedside, one on my kitchen table, because I'm always thinking, oh, now what about putting that together? But the way it's written, it's so witty and erudite and just a beautiful read. So I enjoy those as well.
Yeah.
I don't read the Ottolenghi ones so much because sometimes I feel like, okay, we've done that, that's all there. Other people can do it. But I also know that it contains a lot of information because I know how much goes into every recipe. And of course, I've used that model for my own book, the kind of the rigor in terms of the testing. But sometimes that can bring its own sort of, oh gosh, no, I don't want to see that recipe again.
Yeah. Sometimes it is like that after you publish it. And then the other fear I always had was if I look at it again, I might find a mistake. So I'm just going to pretend it doesn't exist.
Absolutely. Spot on. Exactly. So there are so many books. I mean, I love Nick Brown's books. I love learning from him, the science of it. I think I've become quite impatient over the years. In the past, I would have been fascinated by, the Harold McGee, and I did my fair share of looking at Harold McGee, and Nick's book has, some of that, but even more, is sort of brought out even more practical.
Yeah. On Food and Cooking by Harold McGee, I think has 2 different editions, and that is a wonderful food science book.
It's just fantastic. I think because of the pressures I'm under to get my recipes out, because I have 2 columns that I write for, and that means pretty much every day I'm recipe testing. I don't always have that luxury to sort of delve into the science of it. I just need to find a way to make it work and, send the recipe off.
Yeah.
I read them for all kinds of reasons. But for me, I think it's quite delightful to have pictorially, especially in a dessert, to be able to see it. And for that reason, I'm very, very thankful to the photographer, Laura Edwards, and Annie Riggs, who did the styling at the shoot, because I think they absolutely nailed that. The feeling that you could just look at that book and imagine, do you want to eat this napkin cake?
Yes.
Or do you want to eat this broccoli cake?
Yes. It is a beautiful book. Well, thank you again for coming on the show, talking to us about your beautiful book, Baking and the Meaning of Life, How to Find Joy in 100 Recipes.
Maggie, it's been such a joy speaking with you. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. And I hope you have a great rest of your week and spring, and enjoy all the holidays coming up. Although I think as writing a columnist, you probably enjoy them ahead of time, right?
I do, yes. Mother's Day has already been and done for me, and so is Easter.
It's time to head into the summertime. Well, enjoy whatever season you're in.
Thank you so much, Maggie.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. Again, all the links can be found in the show notes at www.cookbooklove.co. And if you are interested in writing a cookbook of your own, please check out the free cookbook writing masterclass called How to Get Paid to Write a Cookbook. It is designed specifically for food or nutrition experts, and you can check that out at www.cookbookwritersacademy.com/free. So that's it for today's episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. This is your host, Maggie Green. And until next time, have a great day and keep loving your cookbooks.
Thanks for listening to the Cookbook Love Podcast. You can find out more information at www.cookbooklove.co.